Hey, I'm Andrew Connell. This video is an overview of one of the chapters in my course that's available for purchase on my site, Voitanos.io. This overview video is going to give you an idea of everything that the chapter covers. You can learn more by checking out the description in the notes below the video. If you got any questions about this chapter or about the course in general, just make sure you drop a comment below below the video, and I'll be sure to get back to you. So with that, let me get out of the way. Enjoy the overview to this chapter. Hi, welcome back to the course. I'm Andrew, and this is the third chapter of my course on mastering the SharePoint Framework. Now, this chapter is going to explain and walk you through the process of getting your environment set up and fully configured so that you can start working and developing with the SharePoint Framework. So what exactly can you expect from this chapter? We'll first start out with a look at what you're building with the SharePoint Framework and how it differs from what you built when creating SharePoint solutions or add-ins, be those farm or sandbox solutions, SharePoint hosted add-ins or provider hosted add-ins. And this is going to help you keep in the back of your mind what you're building and how it will run when you're setting up your environment, because it'll answer some questions as why some of the new tools are required and why others that you used to use are no longer needed. Then we're going to look at the SharePoint development toolchain that SPFx leverages. You'll quickly see how different the world is when building customizations based on the SharePoint framework. So if you're a traditional SharePoint developer, this can be quite a shock to what you're used to. For those of you who have experience as SharePoint developers, I will draw on the parallels to the tools that we used to use when building solutions or add-ins, because nothing from a high level has really all that much changed. Only the tools have changed. But if you're one of those developers who's got experience with this modern web development toolchain and these popular open source tools, this stuff may be a old hat to you. So you may want to skip over that lesson. One thing I notice with traditional SharePoint developers venturing into the world of SharePoint framework development is that they get overwhelmed very quickly. And I believe this is because there are a lot of unfamiliar tools and technologies that are introduced that you have to install and get through just to build a simple hello world client-side component. But you know what? You don't need to know all these things. Some of the things you can just install and completely forget about them and just ignore them in the future. So I'm going to show you what you need to know and what you can ignore and just be aware of the fact that it's there and that you're using it, but you don't have to know anything specific about it. Now, developing for the SharePoint framework, it's going to require that you have two different things. First, you need a place to deploy and test your customizations. Just like traditional SharePoint development, you'll use SharePoint for this. Now, we're going to start by getting you set up with a SharePoint developer tenant in Microsoft 365 or using an existing tenant. While SharePoint Framework is supported in some on-premises SharePoint deployments, this course focuses just on SharePoint Online. So when I discuss a topic that applies to just SharePoint Online, I'll make a point of mentioning that, but assume what you see works on premises as well. So if you're an on-premises customer, don't think that this course is just for those people who are in SharePoint Online. But as I talked about in previous chapters, there is only limited support for the SharePoint framework on specific on-prem deployments. So there are only certain things you're going to be able to do and certain things you can't do. I'm covering everything in this course, and you'll just have to figure out like what is available just on-prem. And you can do that based on the versions that are supported both on-prem and what versions are what's in that version, what features and what versions they were introduced in the SharePoint framework. Now, the second thing that you're going to need is a developer environment. And this is where you're going to create the customizations, you're going to test them, you're going to debug them, and you're going to package them up for use in SharePoint environments that are all going to support the SharePoint framework. You're going to find a series of lessons on this topic in this chapter on getting your developer environment set up, as there are a few frameworks and tools that you need to install and configure. You'll find a lesson on each one of these different things. Sound good? Fantastic. Then let's get started and let's jump into the first lesson. That ACEs are founded on. You should watch this primer lesson if you've never worked with adaptive cards before. But if you're already familiar with adaptive cards, feel free to skip to the third lesson where we dive right into ACEs. So I'll see you in the next or the next lesson.